Lena traced the rim of her champagne flute, watching the candlelight flicker against the glass. The restaurant hummed with soft laughter and the clink of silverware, a romantic backdrop for their fourth anniversary. A smile tugged at her lips as she imagined Ethan's reaction to the surprise she had planned. A weekend getaway, just the two of them, away from work stress and city noise. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, expecting Ethan's usual running late, babe. Instead, her best friend Sophie had sent a text. Sophie, I'm so sorry, Lena. I didn't know how to tell you. Frowning, Lena clicked the attached image. The air in her lungs vanished. Ethan. In a dimly lit bar, his arm draped lazily around another woman. A woman leaning into him, lips close to his ear. His smile, the way his hand gripped her waist. It wasn't the look of a mistake. It was familiarity. Lena's fingers trembled. Her mind scrambled for explanations. It could be old, it could be fake. But her stomach nodded with the truth. She called Sophie immediately. When was this taken? A hesitation. Then, last night. A sharp, icy numbness settled over her. Are you okay? Sophie's voice was gentle, worried. Lena inhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay composed. I need to go. She ended the call, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the restaurant. The night air was cold against her skin, but the fire in her chest burned hotter. By the time Lena reached their apartment, her hands had stopped shaking. She wasn't sure if it was anger or devastation holding her still. Inside, the place was silent, dimly lit. She stepped into the living room, taking in the framed pictures, the small details of their life together, a throw blanket she had picked, a book he never finished reading. How could he do this? The front door creaked. Footsteps. Ethan entered, tossing his keys onto the counter. Hey, babe, why are you home so? He stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing at her stiff posture. What's wrong? Lena held up her phone. Want to explain this? Ethan's gaze flickered to the screen. His jaw tensed, but he recovered too quickly. Where'd you get that? That's all you have to say? A sigh. Lena, it's not what it looks like. She let out a hollow laugh. Really, because it looks like you're holding another woman. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. It was just a stupid mistake. I had a few drinks and she was... Don't, she cut in, voice trembling. Don't insult me. His expression hardened. Lena, you're overreacting. She took a slow step forward, searching his face, hoping for guilt, regret, anything. Nothing, only annoyance. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just about the picture. This wasn't the first time, the late nights, the dismissive apologies, the phone he always kept face down. How long? She whispered. Ethan's lips parted, then pressed together. He didn't answer. Lena felt it then. The last piece of her love fracturing. She reached for her left hand, sliding off the engagement ring she had once adored. The weight of it felt unbearable now. Ethan's eyes flickered with the first trace of unease. Lena, she tossed the ring, and it landed on the floor with a soft clink. You don't get to have me and cheat on me. Her voice didn't waver. We're done. His face darkened. Lena, don't be dramatic. She stepped past him, grabbed her coat. I should have left the first time you lied. Ethan reached for her arm, but she jerked away. You're making a mistake. She met his gaze one last time. No, Ethan, you did. Then, without looking back, she walked out. For you said, these are not fully formed sentences as a story used to have. Lena traced the rim of her champagne flute, watching the candlelight flicker against the glass. The restaurant was buzzing with soft laughter and the gentle clink of silverware, the perfect romantic setting for her and Ethan's fourth anniversary. She had spent weeks planning this night, making sure everything was perfect. A beautiful dress, his favorite wine, and a surprise trip booked for the weekend. She checked her phone, expecting the usual running late, babe. Instead, a message from her best friend, Sophie, popped up. Sophie, I'm so sorry, Lena. I didn't know how to tell you. Frowning, Lena tapped the attached image, her breath caught in her throat. It was Ethan. Sitting in a dimly lit bar, his arms slung around another woman's waist. She was leaning into him, whispering in his ear, and he was smiling, the same way he used to smile at Lena. His hand gripped the woman's hip possessively, comfortably. This wasn't hesitation, wasn't a moment of regret. It was familiarity. Lena's fingers clenched around the phone. Her mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was an old photo, maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, she knew. Her phone buzzed again. Sophie, it was last night, I saw him myself. Lena's stomach twisted. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her glass. The waiter glanced at her in concern, but she barely noticed. Grabbing her bag, she strode out of the restaurant, barely feeling the cold air against her skin. The streets blurred as she hailed a cab. Every moment with Ethan played in her head on repeat, the way he kissed her forehead in the mornings, the lazy afternoons spent tangled on the couch, the promises he had whispered against her skin. Promises of forever. Lies. By the time she reached their apartment, her hands had stopped shaking, but only because she had forced them to. She unlocked the door, stepping inside the dimly lit living room. Everything was exactly how she had left it, the framed photos of them on the bookshelf, the sweater he had tossed over the couch, the faint scent of his cologne in the air. How could he betray this? Betray her? The front door creaked open. Footsteps. Ethan walked in, tossing his keys onto the counter. "Hey, babe," he said casually, unbuttoning his coat. "Why are you home so?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her standing there, his brows furrowed. "What's wrong?" Lena's throat felt tight as she raised her phone, the image still on the screen. "Want to explain this?" Ethan's eyes flicked to the picture. His jaw tensed, but he recovered quickly. Too quickly. "Where did you get that?" "That's all you have to say." Her voice was eerily calm. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Lena, it's not what it looks like." A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "Really? Because it looks like you're touching another woman the way you touch me." Ethan's expression hardened. "It was a mistake," he said. "I had too much to drink and—" "Don't." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the lie before it could fully form. "Don't insult me like that." For a second she waited for remorse, waited for him to drop the act and tell her the truth. But all she saw was annoyance. That's when it truly sank in. This wasn't about one night, this wasn't a slip-up or a drunken mistake. This was who he had always been. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated. That pause was all she needed. A cold, hollow ache spread through her chest. Slowly, she reached for her left hand, sliding off the engagement ring she had worn for 3 years, the symbol of everything she had believed in. Ethan's eyes flickered with unease as she held it in her palm. "Lena, don't be dramatic." She tossed the ring. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft clink, rolling once before settling near his feet. "You don't get to have me and cheat on me," she said, her voice steady. "We're done." Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Lena, come on, you're really going to throw everything away over one mistake?" She stepped past him, grabbing her coat. He really thought she was the one throwing everything away. She turned back one last time, meeting his gaze. "No, Ethan, you did." And then, without another word, she walked out the door. Lena walked aimlessly through the city, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The night air was crisp, biting at her exposed skin, but she barely felt it. Her mind was too clouded, her heart pounding in a way that made her feel both numb and raw at the same time. She had left. She had actually left. The realization hit her in waves, crashing against the shore of her exhaustion. 4 years. 4 years of memories, of love, of whispered promises, had ended in a single moment with a picture she wished she had never seen. Her phone buzzed again. "Ethan, come back so we can talk." A scoff escaped her lips. Talk, now he wanted to talk. After standing there, emotionless, as she threw away the ring he had given her, after making her feel like she was the unreasonable one. She shoved her phone into her coat pocket, ignoring the message, and kept walking. The streets were quieter now, the late hour thinning out the usual crowd. She had no destination in mind, but eventually her steps led her to a familiar place, Sophie's apartment. She hesitated only briefly before knocking. A few seconds later, the door swung open and Sophie's worried face appeared. "Oh my God," Sophie breathed, immediately pulling Lena inside. "I've been calling you." "Are you okay?" Lena nodded numbly, though the truth was she wasn't sure. She wanted to be okay. She wanted to feel strong and indifferent, like the kind of woman who could walk away without looking back. But the ache in her chest made it hard to breathe. Sophie guided her to the couch, wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders. "Tell me everything," she said gently. Lena stared at the floor, struggling to find the right words. "I confronted him," she finally said, her voice hollow. "He didn't deny it. He acted like I was overreacting." Sophie's expression darkened. "I can't believe him, after everything you've done for him, after all the times you forgave him when he barely deserved it." Lena winced. "So you think I should have seen this coming?" Sophie's features softened. "That's not what I meant, I hate that he made you feel like this." A bitter laugh escaped Lena's lips. "You and me both." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city outside. Sophie reached for Lena's hand, squeezing it gently. You're not alone in this, you know? You don't have to figure everything out tonight. Lena nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure what came next. She had spent so long planning a future with Ethan, only to have it all crumble in an instant. What was she supposed to do now? Her phone vibrated again. Ethan, this is ridiculous. You're really ignoring me. Ethan, we've been together for 4 years, Lena. Don't throw it away over nothing. Lena clenched her jaw. Nothing? That was what he called it. Before she could think twice, she typed a response. Lena, you slept with someone else. That's not nothing. A few seconds later, his reply came. Ethan, I made a mistake. I was drunk. You know I love you. Her grip on the phone tightened. It was always the same excuse. A mistake. Alcohol. Never his fault. Never accountability. But this time was different. She wasn't the same Lena who had overlooked the warning signs, who had given him the benefit of the doubt. This time she had walked away, and she wasn't going back. She let out a slow breath and typed her final reply. Lena, no anniversary gift this year, Ethan. You get something better. She paused before hitting send. Lena freedom. She pressed the button and watched as the message delivered. A sharp, undeniable finality settled in her chest. Sophie peered over her shoulder, reading the texts. Damn, she muttered. That was brutal, I love it. Lena let out a short, humorless laugh, but it quickly faded. A part of her wanted Ethan to beg, to fight for her, to realize what he lost. But deep down, she knew he wouldn't. Ethan never truly thought he would lose her, and that was exactly why she had to leave. Sophie nudged her gently. Come on, you're staying here tonight, I'll get you something to wear. Lena wanted to argue. She didn't want to be a burden, but the exhaustion was setting in, weighing down her limbs. She nodded wordlessly, and Sophie disappeared into her room. As Lena curled up on the couch, staring at the city lights beyond the window, a quiet sadness crept in. She had done the right thing. She knew that. But doing the right thing didn't make it hurt any less. She closed her eyes, letting out a slow, shaky breath. Tomorrow, she would figure out what came next. Tonight, she just needed to survive the heartbreak. Lena woke up to the smell of coffee and the soft hum of the city outside Sophie's apartment window. For a moment, she forgot. She forgot about the aching hollow in her chest, the ring she had tossed, the text she had sent. But reality crept in like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it the bitter sting of betrayal. She turned over on the couch, groaning into the pillow. The blanket Sophie had given her had slipped to the floor. She barely had the energy to reach for it. Morning, heartbreak queen, Sophie called from the kitchen. Lena let out a muffled groan. Sophie chuckled, carrying 2 mugs of coffee over. She handed one to Lena and plopped down on the other end of the couch. So, what's the plan? The plan? For 4 years, the plan had been Ethan. Marriage, a house, a future together. Now, there was nothing but a blank slate stretching endlessly before her. I don't know, Lena admitted, staring into her coffee. I don't even know where to start, Sophie sighed. Well, you're obviously not going back to him, and you sure as hell aren't gonna mope around here forever, so let's take it one step at a time. Lena managed a weak smile. Step 1, not moping. Exactly, Sophie said, and step 2 is figuring out where you're gonna live. Right, that. Lena had been living with Ethan for the past 2 years. Their apartment, his apartment now, was filled with pieces of her life. Her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelf, her favorite mug in the kitchen. The thought of going back, of standing in that space where everything had fallen apart, made her stomach twist, but she couldn't avoid it forever. I'll go today, she murmured. Get my things and leave my keys. Sophie hesitated, concern flickering across her face. You sure you want to do that alone? Lena nodded. I need to. I need to see it one last time and be done with it. Sophie didn't argue, but her expression remained tight with worry. All right, but if you need backup, you call me, okay? Lena took a deep breath, gripping the warm mug between her fingers. Okay. A few hours later, Lena stood outside the apartment she used to call home, the key cold in her palm. She had expected to feel anger, resentment, maybe even regret. But all she felt was exhaustion. She pushed open the door, stepping inside. Everything looked the same. The couch where they used to cuddle on Sunday mornings, the table where they had shared countless dinners, the framed photos on the wall, her face smiling beside his. A lie, frozen in time. She inhaled sharply and moved to the bedroom. Her suitcase sat in the closet, half full from the weekend trip she had planned before everything shattered. She yanked it out, her hands moving on autopilot, folding clothes, grabbing essentials. Then she saw it. Ethan's shirt. The one she used to wear when she couldn't sleep, the one that smelled like him. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to push it aside. She didn't need reminders of him. She was halfway through packing when she heard the front door open. Her body tensed. A moment later, Ethan appeared in the doorway. "I figured you'd come." Lena exhaled slowly, keeping her hands busy. "I'm just here for my things." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "You don't have to do this, Lena." She let out a bitter laugh. "Do what? Have self-respect?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I messed up. But you can't just walk away from everything we built." She zipped up the suitcase. "Watch me." His jaw tightened. "It wasn't serious." She turned to face him fully, arms crossing over her chest. "And that's supposed to make it better?" Ethan hesitated, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "I love you, Lena, you know that." She swallowed hard, willing herself to stay strong. "Maybe you do," she said quietly. "But not enough." Ethan took a step closer. "It was one mistake, one night. It doesn't erase everything we've been through." Lena searched his face, looking for the man she had loved. But all she saw was someone who had expected her to stay, someone who had never truly feared losing her. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her keys. Holding them up, she let them dangle for a moment before placing them on the dresser. "This is goodbye, Ethan." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Lena picked up her suitcase and walked past him. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing back one last time. "You don't get to break my heart and still have me," she said, her voice steady. "Not anymore." And with that, she stepped out, closing the door behind her. The moment Lena stepped out of that apartment, it felt as if a weight had been lifted off her chest, only to be replaced by a different kind of heaviness. The finality of it settled deep inside her, an ache that wouldn't fade anytime soon. She rolled her suitcase down the hallway, out into the cool afternoon air. The city bustled around her, indifferent to the fact that her world had just collapsed. She had nowhere to go. Sophie had offered to let her stay as long as she needed, but Lena didn't want to overstay her welcome. More than that, she needed space, space to think, to process, to figure out what came next. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a brief, foolish second, she thought it might be Ethan again. But when she pulled it out, it was her mother. Lena hesitated. She hadn't told her parents anything yet. If she answered now, she'd have to pretend everything was fine, and she wasn't sure she had the energy for that. Instead, she let the call go to voicemail and kept walking. She booked a hotel room for the night, a small, nondescript place on the quieter side of town. The receptionist barely looked up as she checked in, sliding the key card across the counter with a tired expression. The room was small but clean, the bed neatly made, the air faintly smelling of lavender-scented fabric softener. She set her suitcase down by the dresser and collapsed onto the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. This is real. This is happening. For so long, Ethan had been a constant in her life. Even when things were hard, even when he frustrated her, she had never imagined a future without him. And now she had to. The urge to cry crept up on her, but she swallowed it down. She had already spent too many tears on him. Instead, she reached for her phone and opened the last conversation she had with Ethan. Her message, "No anniversary gift this year. You get something better." Freedom sat there, unanswered. Good. She locked her phone and tossed it onto the bed beside her. A knock at the door startled her. Her heart leaped into her throat. For a fleeting second, she thought no, he wouldn't. She shook the thought away and got up, peeking through the peephole. "Sophie." Lena let out a breath of relief and pulled the door open. Sophie held up a brown paper bag. "I come bearing food." Lena stepped aside, letting her in. "How did you know where I was?" Sophie plopped down on the bed, kicking off her shoes. "Please, you forget I know you. I figured you wouldn't go home, and I doubted you wanted to stay with me for long, so I checked nearby hotels." She grinned. "You're predictable." Lena sighed, sitting beside her. "Is that a bad thing?" Sophie shrugged. "Not always, but maybe now's the time to be unpredictable." Lena looked down at her hands. "I don't even know what that means." Sophie handed her the bag. "It means that for once in your life, stop thinking about what's safe, what's expected. Start thinking about what you want." "No Ethan, no compromises, just you." Lena opened the bag and pulled out a container of pasta. Her stomach grumbled at the sight of it. Sophie nudged her. "Eat first, life-changing epiphanies later." Lena huffed a quiet laugh and took a bite. The warmth of the food spread through her, grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. As they ate, Sophie started talking about work, about a coworker who had spilled coffee on his laptop and then tried to dry it with a hairdryer, effectively setting off the office smoke alarm. Lena found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in days. And for a moment, she wasn't the girl who had just walked away from the love of her life. She was just Lena. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days after leaving Ethan felt like a slow unraveling. There were moments when Lena thought she had it all together, when she managed to wake up, get dressed, and push through the hours without thinking about him. But there were also moments when the ache returned, raw and biting, and she'd find herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, wondering how it all went wrong. She tried to fill the space with distractions. Sophie kept her busy, inviting her to dinners, coffee dates, anything to get Lena out of her head. And for the most part, it worked. She even started working on a project for a local nonprofit she'd been meaning to get involved with, and the new sense of purpose felt like a small victory. But there was still something missing, something she couldn't shake. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't the life they had planned together. It was her own reflection. She had always thought of herself in the context of their relationship. She was Lena and Ethan. But now she was just Lena. And for the first time in years, she had to figure out who that was. It was strange, trying to fit into a life that didn't include him. When she reached for her phone to send him a message about something trivial, she'd remember. No, not anymore. And the silence between them wasn't just in the physical distance. It was emotional too. Ethan's messages had stopped after that last one, the one where she had told him it was over. She didn't expect an apology, didn't expect him to beg, but she had hoped. That was the part of her she didn't want to admit to Sophie. She didn't want to tell anyone how much she longed for Ethan to come to her, to apologize, to somehow make it right. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't happen. Ethan never fought for her before. Why would he start now? It was late afternoon when Sophie showed up at her door, holding a package wrapped in bright, colorful paper. "Surprise," Sophie said with a grin. Lena raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" Sophie shrugged. "You need a distraction. Open it." Lena tore off the paper and found a small potted plant inside, succulent, its green leaves vibrant and alive. A small card was attached to the plant, and Lena read the simple words scrawled across it: "Here's to new beginnings." Lena chuckled, her eyes softening as she looked at Sophie. "You're ridiculous." "I know," Sophie said, sitting down beside her, "but maybe you needed a little reminder that things can grow again. Not everything stays dead forever." Lena placed the plant on the table, admiring it for a moment. "I don't feel like I'm growing, Sophie. I feel stuck." Sophie reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not stuck. You're just in a space where you don't know what comes next. It's okay to feel lost for a while, but you won't be there forever." Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. There were days when she felt like she could go on and move forward without looking back, but then there were moments, those quiet moments when the world seemed to stop, that she would feel it. The whole Ethan left behind. "Do you think he ever really loved me?" Lena asked, the question escaping her lips before she could stop it. Sophie hesitated, thinking carefully before answering. "I think he did in his own way, but sometimes love isn't enough, you know? You can love someone and still not be able to give them what they need." Lena ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. I gave him everything, and it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." Sophie shook her head firmly. "No, you were more than enough. You just weren't his priority, and that's not on you." Lena swallowed, trying to ignore the sting of the words. "I keep thinking maybe if I had been better, maybe if I had tried harder." "Stop," Sophie interrupted, her voice sharp. "You gave him your heart, Lena. You gave him your trust. You did everything you could. But some people don't deserve it. He didn't deserve you." Lena leaned back against the couch, staring at the plant. "I thought I was strong. I thought I could handle it." "You are strong," Sophie said softly. "But strength doesn't mean never feeling pain. It means standing up and facing it. And you're doing that right now, even if it doesn't feel like it." Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Sophie's words. Maybe she wasn't as weak as she thought. The days after that conversation were still filled with uncertainty, but slowly, something inside Lena began to shift. It wasn't an overnight change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. But she started to realize that she was more than just the girl who had been left behind. She was Lena. And for the first time in a long time, she was starting to feel like she could be whole again. Lena had never been someone who believed in fate. She had always chalked up things like chance encounters and serendipitous events to randomness, the universe doing its usual thing. But after everything that had happened, After the way her world had been torn apart, she couldn't help but wonder if there was something more at play. It was a Monday morning when she received the text. It wasn't from Ethan, though, much to her relief. The message was from an unknown number, but the words made her stomach tighten. "Hey, Lena, it's Lucas. I was wondering if you'd like to meet for coffee sometime." Lena's mind went blank as she stared at the screen. Lucas. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not since that fateful day at Ethan's company party when she had met him for the first time. He was Ethan's colleague, tall, dark-haired, with a smile that had a way of making everything around him seem a little brighter. He had been nothing more than a friendly face back then, someone Lena had shared a few polite conversations with while Ethan mingled with his business associates. But now, Lena wasn't sure what to make of it. Her first instinct was to delete the message and pretend it never happened. She didn't need another man in her life right now, not someone who could complicate things, not someone who might make her forget where she had just come from. But then she thought about how lonely she felt sometimes, about how empty the days had been since Ethan. She needed something, someone, to remind her that there was more to life than heartache. So she typed back, "Sure, I'd love to. When?" The reply came almost instantly. "How about tomorrow? Noon at that cafe we went to last year?" Lena hesitated. She didn't know if she was ready, but there was something about his tone, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, this could be the first step in something new. "Okay, tomorrow at noon," she replied. The next day, Lena found herself sitting at a corner table of the small cafe, her fingers nervously tapping against the surface of her coffee cup. She had chosen a simple outfit, nothing too bold or attention-grabbing, but still, her heart raced as the door opened and Lucas walked in. He looked the same, maybe a little more polished than she remembered, but his smile was still warm and familiar. "Hey, Lena," he greeted her, his voice smooth. "Hey, Lucas," she replied, standing to greet him. "How have you been?" He sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good, really good, you?" "Good too," she said, trying to keep her tone casual. "Just figuring things out." He nodded, understanding. "Yeah, I get it. I know things must have been tough recently." Lena felt a sharp pang in her chest but kept her composure. "Yeah, but I'm getting there." They talked about work, life, everything and nothing at all. For the first time in weeks, Lena felt herself begin to relax, to enjoy someone else's company without the shadow of Ethan looming over her. There was something about Lucas that made her feel seen, as if she wasn't just a part of someone else's story, but a person in her own right. As they talked, she couldn't help but notice how comfortable she felt. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just a simple conversation between two people who were getting to know each other. After an hour, the conversation turned to more personal matters. "So," Lucas said, leaning back in his chair, "if you don't mind me asking, what happened with you and Ethan? I know you two were pretty serious." Lena's stomach tightened at the mention of his name. It felt like a betrayal, even now, to talk about him to someone else, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She took a deep breath and glanced out the window before answering. He cheated on me." Lucas's eyes widened, his brows furrowing in concern. "Oh, Lena, I'm sorry." Lena gave a small, tight smile. "It's okay, I'm better now, I left him." There was a long pause before Lucas spoke again. "You did the right thing." Lena met his gaze, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just saying that to be polite, he meant it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like a quiet understanding, a recognition of the pain she had been through. Finally, after a few moments, Lucas broke the silence with a small smile. "So, tell me about the real you. What makes you happy?" Lena blinked, taken aback. No one had asked her that in a long time. Not even Ethan. She thought for a moment before answering. "I used to love painting. I haven't picked up a brush in months." Lucas leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Why don't you start again?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity almost startling. Could she really do that? Could she go back to something that had once brought her so much joy? For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena allowed herself to imagine it. A life where she was more than just someone who had been left behind. A life where she could be whole again, on her own terms. Maybe it was time to find that part of herself again. The next few days passed in a haze. Lena found herself reflecting on the conversation with Lucas, more than she expected. She had almost forgotten the person she used to be, the girl who loved to paint, who could spend hours lost in the strokes of a brush. creating something beautiful from nothing. She hadn't realized just how much she missed it until Lucas had asked. That night, she dug out her old painting supplies from the back of her closet. The canvas was a little dusty, the brushes worn from years of use. As she set everything up, she was struck by how foreign it all felt. She had allowed so many things, Ethan, their life, her role in it, to bury the things she once cared about. But tonight, there would be no distractions. No one to tell her how to live, what to prioritize. It would just be her and the canvas. Her first brushstroke felt awkward, almost like her hand had forgotten how to move this way. But as she kept going, it slowly came back to her, the rhythm, the flow. The deep breath she took when the colors began to mix together, forming something tangible, something real. An hour passed, then two. Her mind was consumed by the process, the way the colors bled into each other, the shapes that began to take form on the canvas. For the first time in so long, Lena felt at peace. She painted well into the night, her surroundings fading away as she got lost in her art. When she finally stood back to look at what she had created, a sense of satisfaction washed over her. The painting wasn't finished, not yet. But it felt like a beginning, a step toward reclaiming something that had been buried for far too long. The next morning, she was exhausted but oddly energized. She didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to face the world yet. But the thought of the painting, unfinished and waiting for her, drove her to get up. Her phone buzzed as she made coffee. It was a message from Sophie. "How's the painting coming along?" "You should send me a picture," Lena smiled, tapping out a quick reply. "I'll send you a picture soon, but honestly, I think I've found something I've been missing for a while," Sophie replied almost immediately. "I knew it. That's the real Lena coming back. Don't let her go." Lena stared at the message for a moment, her heart swelling. Sophie had always been there, supporting her when everything else felt lost. As the day unfolded, Lena kept thinking about Sophie's words. The real Lena. It was a reminder she hadn't realized she needed. She wasn't just a victim of betrayal. She wasn't someone defined by what Ethan had done to her. She was more than the sum of her heartbreak. She was an artist. She was a person who could grow, evolve, and move beyond her past. Later that afternoon, she returned to the cafe where she had met Lucas. It wasn't a date, not exactly. But there was something different now, something she couldn't ignore. When he had asked her about painting, he had shown a level of curiosity, something Ethan never seemed to have. It was refreshing, and for the first time in a long while, Lena found herself actually wanting to see where things could go. Lucas was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with a book open in front of him. He looked up when she walked in and smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Hey, Lena," he greeted her, standing to pull out a chair. "You look better today." Lena smiled as she sat down. "I feel better." They fell into easy conversation, talking about everything and nothing all at once. But there was a difference this time. Lena wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't trying to be someone she wasn't just to make things easier. She was being honest, open, and real. Lucas seemed to notice the change too. His attention wasn't just on her looks or small talk. He asked questions, thoughtful ones, ones that made her think deeply about herself, about what she wanted out of life. At one point he asked, "What's something you've always wanted to do but never had the chance?" Lena took a moment to think about it, realizing how few of her dreams had ever been her own. For so long, her life had been tied to Ethan's. "I've always wanted to travel," she admitted. "To see more of the world, but I always put it off, thinking I'd have time later." Lucas nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. "You should do it. Life's too short to wait around for later." It was the first time someone had said that to her in a long time, and it stuck with her. She wasn't someone who waited anymore. The rest of their conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in weeks, Lena felt like she was reconnecting with the world around her. Not just with Lucas, but with herself. By the time the afternoon was over, the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the streets outside. They both stood to leave, and Lucas walked her to her car. As they reached the door, he paused and looked at her. "Lena, I don't know where this is going, but I'd really like to see you again, if you're open to it." Lena looked up at him, her heart pounding. He wasn't asking for anything complicated. He wasn't making promises he couldn't keep. He was simply offering her a chance at something new, and for the first time in months, Lena felt like she could take it. "I'd like that too," she said softly. As she drove home that evening, Lena realized that the chains of her past weren't broken overnight. It was going to take time, effort, and a lot of self-reflection. But today had been a step forward, a big one. She wasn't just healing anymore. She was growing. The days blurred together in a gentle, almost comforting rhythm. Lena's mornings were filled with painting, and each evening, she found herself looking forward to her next meeting with Lucas. It wasn't rushed, wasn't complicated. They were both slowly building something, just two people discovering each other, without the weight of expectations hanging over them. Lena knew it was still early, that she was only beginning to trust the idea of happiness again, but there was a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. When she was with Lucas, she could almost forget the chaos of the past, the pain of betrayal. One evening, as she stood in front of her canvas, adding the final touches to her latest piece, the phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from Lucas. "Hey, I've been thinking, how about dinner this weekend? A proper date?" Lena smiled as she stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. A proper date. It felt strange in a good way. She hadn't been on a date since Ethan. The idea of stepping into a new chapter, with someone who wasn't him, was both exciting and terrifying. "I'd like that," she typed back, her heart beating a little faster. The weekend came quicker than she expected, and when the night of their date arrived, Lena found herself standing in front of the mirror, struggling to choose what to wear. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but she also wanted to look different, different from the woman who had spent the last year drowning in heartbreak. She finally settled on a simple, black dress. It was elegant without being too flashy. She was ready to be herself, no pretenses, no masks. When Lucas picked her up, he seemed to be just as calm as she was. He wore a sharp, well-fitted suit, his dark hair styled in that effortless way that made him look both polished and relaxed. "You look amazing," he said as she stepped into the car. Lena smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. You're not so bad yourself." The restaurant was intimate, tucked away in a quiet part of the city. The atmosphere was cozy, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. The moment they sat down, Lena felt herself settle into the experience. There was no pressure, no tension, just the simple joy of sharing a meal with someone who was becoming increasingly important to her. As they ate, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about books, travel, their favorite movies, nothing too heavy, but still, there was an ease to it that made Lena feel at home. "Do you ever think about what you want in the future?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Lena paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She hadn't thought about the future in so long. The future had always seemed like a distant dream when she was with Ethan, something out of reach, overshadowed by his expectations. "I've thought about it a lot recently," Lena replied, her eyes meeting his. "I want to find happiness on my own terms. Not because someone tells me how it should look, but because it's what I truly want." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "I think that's the key. You have to find your own path. It's easy to get lost in someone else's version of happiness." Lena's heart swelled at his words. She wasn't used to hearing such understanding, such genuine insight. It was like Lucas could see her, really see her, for who she was, not just the pieces that had been left broken by her past. Later, after dinner, they took a walk through the nearby park. The night air was cool, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the world. Lena breathed in the fresh air, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't realized she was missing. She had been so caught up in healing from the wreckage that was Ethan, she'd forgotten what it felt like to just be alive. "Do you want to walk for a little longer?" Lucas asked. "Yeah, I'd like that," Lena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They walked in silence for a while, just enjoying the stillness of the night. But then, as they stopped by a fountain, Lucas turned to her, his expression serious. "Lena," he said, his voice quieter now, "I know this is all new and I don't want to rush you, but I really like you. I'd like to see where this goes if you're open to it." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything would shift, when they would define what was happening between them. But now that it was here, she felt a sense of fear creep up on her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully let go of her past. "I like you too," she said, her voice steady but soft, "but I don't want to rush into anything. I'm still figuring things out, and I don't want to bring you into something messy." Lucas smiled, a gentle understanding in his eyes. "I'm not rushing, Lena. I just want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Here was someone who didn't want to fix her, didn't want to rush her into something she wasn't ready for. He simply wanted to be there, to let things unfold naturally. I'm not sure what I'm ready for yet, Lena whispered, but I'll figure it out. With time? Lucas reached out, gently taking her hand in his. Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lena allowed herself to believe that things could be different, that maybe, just maybe, she could trust in the future again. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet intensity that Lena hadn't expected. With Lucas, there was no pressure to be someone she wasn't. They spent their time exploring the city, enjoying each other's company without rushing. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt herself easing into a kind of normalcy, one that didn't involve fear or self-doubt. However, as her life with Lucas began to feel more secure, the ghosts of her past started creeping back in. It was as if her mind, now at peace, had decided it was finally safe to confront everything she had buried. And at the center of it all was Ethan. One evening, as Lena sat at her kitchen table sipping tea, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. Hesitant, she picked it up and unlocked the screen. "Lena, it's Ethan. We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat, and a wave of nausea washed over her. For months, she had avoided any contact with him. After the day she tossed her ring, she swore to herself that she would never go back, never let him back into her life. But the message hung in the air like a heavy cloud, filling the space around her with tension. Lena stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys, unsure what to do. There were a million emotions stirring inside her: anger, confusion, sadness, but most of all, fear. Fear that one conversation would unravel everything she had fought so hard to rebuild. A part of her wanted to delete the message and forget about it. But then, another part of her whispered that she needed closure. She had to face this. She couldn't keep running from the truth. Taking a deep breath, Lena typed out a reply. "I don't know what you think we need to talk about, Ethan. But I'm not the same person I was when we ended things." A few moments later, a reply came through. "I know, I just need to see you. Can we meet? I want to apologize. I need to make things right." Lena's fingers tightened around the phone, her throat constricting. She had heard it all before: the empty apologies, the promises that never held weight. But this time, something felt different. She had to face him, not for his sake, but for hers. "Fine," she replied, her mind already reeling with what she might say. "Tomorrow, at the cafe we used to go to. Noon." The message sent, and Lena set the phone down, feeling a cold chill creep through her. She hadn't expected to see Ethan again, not like this. The idea of confronting him made her stomach twist, but it was something she had to do. The next day, as she walked into the cafe, her heart was pounding in her chest. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries filled the air, but there was an edge to everything now. This wasn't a casual meeting. It wasn't just a cup of coffee with a friend. It was a reckoning. She spotted Ethan almost immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, his back slightly hunched, his eyes downcast. He looked different, older, more worn than she remembered. The confident air he once carried had faded into something quieter, something more remorseful. Lena stood still for a moment, taking in the sight of him. He hadn't changed in appearance, but there was something off about him. It wasn't the same man who had once promised her forever. Ethan looked up as she approached, his eyes widening in surprise. "Lena," he started, his voice low and hesitant. "I didn't expect you to actually come." Lena took a seat across from him, her expression unreadable. "You wanted to talk, so let's talk." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. His gaze dropped to the table for a moment, then returned to meet her eyes. I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt you in ways I can't even explain. I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day since it ended." Lena felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. His apology felt like a hollow echo, like a broken record that had been replayed one too many times. She had heard these words before, but they never meant anything. Not then, and certainly not now. "I don't need your apology, Ethan," Lena said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need your guilt. You cheated on me, you lied to me for years. I'm not asking for an explanation anymore. It doesn't matter." His eyes flickered with pain, and for a moment, Lena could see the vulnerability in him, the man who had once promised her everything. But she wouldn't fall for it again. "You have no idea how much I regret what I did," Ethan continued, his voice breaking slightly. "It was a mistake. I was confused and I was scared of losing you, but I realize now how badly I hurt you." Lena's heart didn't soften. She felt the weight of his words, but they were just that, words. They didn't change the fact that he had destroyed everything they had built. "You had every chance to be honest," she replied quietly. "You chose not to. You chose her over me, and that's something I can't forget." There was a long silence between them. Lena could feel her chest tighten as the memories surged, of nights spent waiting for him to come home, of endless conversations where he promised to do better, to be better. But those promises were never kept. "I'm not here to make you forgive me," Ethan said softly. "I just needed you to know how sorry I am. I ruined everything." Lena's gaze softened just slightly, but her resolve remained unbroken. "You didn't just ruin everything, Ethan. You ruined me. But I've spent so long rebuilding myself, piece by piece. I don't need you to be sorry for me. I'm stronger now because of what you did. You gave me a reason to change." Her words hit him harder than she expected. She saw it in the way his face crumbled, the way he looked at her as if she were something both unreachable and unrecognizable. For a moment, Lena felt a pang of something, regret, maybe, or just the sheer weight of all they had lost. But it wasn't enough to undo what he had done. She had moved on, and that was something he could never take away from her. "I need you to leave," Lena said softly but with finality. "We're done, for good." Ethan nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't argue. He didn't try to change her mind. He simply stood up, his face pale, and walked away. Lena watched him go, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. The past was finally behind her. The days that followed felt like a fog lifting from her mind. It was as if, after all the turmoil and confusion, Lena had finally cleared the air. Confronting Ethan had been a long time coming, but she hadn't realized just how much it would change her until after he left the cafe. As the door shut behind him, there was no immediate weight on her chest, no crushing feeling of betrayal. There was only the quiet hum of a new beginning. Lena stood at the table for a while after he walked away, staring at the spot where he had sat. For a moment, she could still feel the echoes of their past, the love they once shared, the hurt, the betrayal, but the feeling faded quickly. In its place, something entirely different grew. It was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that she had finally let go, and for the first time in ages, she could breathe. The night fell gently over the city as she walked back home. The streets, once familiar and fraught with memories, now felt empty in a freeing way. She realized that the person she had once been, caught in the web of Ethan's lies, was no longer there. She was free, and it felt exhilarating. When Lena got home, she immediately went to the small box she had tucked away in the back of her closet. Inside was the ring Ethan had given her, the symbol of everything they had shared. It had weighed her down for so long, a constant reminder of promises broken and trust shattered. But now, in the quiet space of her own apartment, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She took the ring in her hand, feeling its coldness against her skin. For a moment, she simply stared at it, almost in disbelief. But as she held it, she realized that she didn't need it anymore. She didn't need any of the past to define her future. Without hesitation, Lena walked over to the window, opened it, and tossed the ring into the night air. She watched as it fell, spinning, catching the moonlight one last time before it landed with a soft clink on the pavement below. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Lucas. "How did it go?" Lena smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief. She hadn't spoken to him since their dinner, but she had a feeling that the words from earlier, about not rushing, had stuck with him too. He respected her need for space for time to heal, but now she knew it was time to open herself to the possibility of something more, something real. "I'm okay now," she replied. "I'm free." The reply was immediate. "I'm glad. When you're ready, I'm here." Lena felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest at those words. She wasn't ready yet, not fully, but she knew now that she didn't have to carry the weight of her past anymore. There was something beautiful waiting for her ahead, she just needed to be open to it. And the best part? She didn't have to do it alone. The following days passed in a quiet, steady rhythm. Lena threw herself into her art, rediscovering the passion she had nearly lost during the months of pain. She spent time with friends, laughing and sharing stories, the kind that made her heart feel lighter. She went to the cafe by the park, sipped her favorite coffee, and simply sat in silence, feeling at peace with herself. But it was Lucas who really changed the way she saw herself. He never pressured her, never asked her to move faster than she was ready for. He simply supported her, offering small gestures of kindness that filled her with hope. And slowly, as they spent more time together, Lena began to realize that she wasn't afraid of love anymore. She wasn't afraid to be seen, to be known for who she truly was, flaws, scars, and all. One evening, as they sat together on a bench in the park, the air crisp and filled with the scent of autumn, Lucas turned to her. His expression was soft, but there was something serious about the way he looked at her. "I know we've been taking it slow, and I respect that," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "But I want you to know that I'm here, Lena. I'm not going anywhere." Lena's heart fluttered in her chest. She had never realized how much she needed to hear those words until that moment. It was the assurance she had been searching for, the quiet promise of a future that didn't have to be overshadowed by the past. "I'm ready," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with certainty. "I'm ready for us." Lucas smiled, a slow, tender smile that made Lena's chest tighten with emotion. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. The world around them seemed to pause, and in that moment, Lena knew that everything had changed. She wasn't just free of her past, she was free to embrace her future, a future with someone who truly saw her for who she was. And for the first time in a long while, Lena believed in the possibility of something good, something lasting. It wasn't about erasing the hurt. It wasn't about pretending the past had never happened. But it was about finding the courage to let go and allow something new to blossom. She had thrown away the ring that had once symbolized a love that was never meant to last. Now, she was ready to embrace a love that was hers, one built on trust, patience, and most importantly, freedom. As they sat together in the quiet park, the future stretched out before them, endless and full of possibility. Lena knew that, no matter what came next, she had finally found peace.